Fine. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kedeshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu v'pasuk b'divrei Torah. Baruch na Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha b'finu v'fiyah Beit Yisrael. V'niyeh anachnu v'tzeitzeinu v'tzeitzeim Beit Yisrael. Kulanu yodei shemecha v'lomdei Toratech lishma Baruch atah Adonai l'mei Torah l'amo Yisrael.
Amen.
Amen. Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher b'chabanu mikol hamim v'natan lanu Torato Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen.
So,
Amen.
just quickly, Arthur wanted to do the shiur in respect of a family member that was sick. Arthur, instead of the whole story, just give us the name, please.
Okay. Just give me 1 second. Just 1 second. Trying to find it quickly.
Because
I know I sent it to you there. Okay. It was Malka Bat Hindelaya.
Malka Bat Hindelaya. Okay, so I hope this shiur in her merit, in our merits and the merits of her, gives her a full refuah, and that's not the reward, but it's just the added benefit. So
Okay.
Arthur, I hope you'll...
It's actually my cousin, who's actually got breast cancer as well, and fighting cancer as well. It's got COVID, but they say she's doing well. She's recovering nicely at the moment.
All right, so we still have to Damon. That's good. So,
Can you also, I'm also doing the yard side of my dad. It's not exactly the right day. It's a couple of days late, but I managed to get a minyan sorted out for last night. So I took it, and so I am doing a yard side. I've got a yard side candle. So it's just, my dad's name is Sidney Wilstoller, and his Hebrew name was Shakta. That's all I can tell you.
Okay, so Gavin, it's important. Thanks for letting us know, because he'd be very proud of you, my friend. You've made
100%. Yeah. I've got the Kabb doing it. I tried to organize it before, it didn't work out, but they are doing it today. And last night they did it.
Okay, so let's learn halacha and Mishnah and Torah, etc. And thanks, Gav, for making that to our attention. We were discussing about vasing, what disruptions in the middle of a meal, etc. Now we're going from the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch to the Mishnah Brura, page 178. And I'm just going to go through this quickly. Marco had an important question. So the Mishnah Brura, page 178. So going somewhere else in the middle of the meal. So the general rule is that one should not leave one's place of eating before benching or saying brocha achroina, regardless of the food. So whether you're saying mizonot or you're saying the full birkat hamazon, you shouldn't leave your place of eating. So we will deal with what happens when one leaves that place. The laws for Sephardim are different. The Mishnah Brura is specifically for Ashkenazim. So, for example, a person was eating a sandwich at home and then decided to go to the office mid-sandwich. To what are the ramifications? Here are the rules. So if one eats bread and leaves to go to another place, he should still preferably do birkat hamazon in the first place before leaving, unless he had in mind at the time of saying hamotzi to go and eat at a second place too. So this is because of two concerns. He'll get distracted and will forget to do birkat hamazon. Guys, this has happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
And he'll be so long that the time in which he can still do birkat hamazon would have lapsed. So sometimes what I have done in emergencies, I've done birkat hamazon in the car. In other words, I've had to go somewhere quickly and sort it out, and I couldn't stay there where I did birkat hamazon in the car. But I can honestly tell you, for the 2 minutes that it takes to do birkat hamazon, you might as well do it where you are. Just remember, deraisa, there's part of the birkat hamazon that's derabanan and some that's deraisa. We'll go through that, but for sure the deraisa part, you can sit there for half a minute. 50 seconds is not going to make any difference. So even if you have people waiting for him in the second place, where you know for certain that you will eat there, you should still rather do birkat hamazon before you leave, if possible. If you did not do birkat hamazon in the first place, as you should have, you should not make another hamotzi in the second place. Furthermore, when you do birkat hamazon in the second place, it will cover both the eating in the first place and the second place, because in effect, you're continuing the first meal with its brachas in the second place. and it doesn't require new brochas. However, this is only where you ate at least the kazait in the first place. So kazait is the minimum amount to bench in that first location. If you never ate a kazait's worth, you were not obligated in B'kata Mazon in your next eating. It's a whole new event, and you'll have to make a new hamotzi and B'kata Mazon in the second place. So if you ate half a sandwich at home, then realized you had to go to the office, ideally you should do B'kata Mazon before you go to the office, and then start a new meal at the office. This is obviously, when we say ideal is to do B'kata Mazon when you're there. But if you can't, or you didn't do that B'kata Mazon before you left, you do not make a new hamotzi, because you continue eating at the office, so your B'kata Mazon afterwards will cover the first sandwich too. Also, you have to have...
You don't wash your hands either.
No. Just let me finish. If originally he had in mind to make a motzi at home in the first half, and he goes to the office midway, he can go to the office after eating a kazait of bread, and you don't need to make a new hamotzi there. Obviously, Gav, you don't vas if you don't make a new hamotzi. That's a given, Butti. For sure, you're right. That is.
Can I ask you something that's a trickier example than yours? I don't want to waste time, but just very briefly. If it's 5 to 6, you have a sandwich, you don't realize it's 5 to 6. You got a minyan at 6 o'clock, right? You got 1 minute to make it. There's no ways you can finish Birkat Hamazon in time. What takes preference? Go to a minyan doing Mincha and Mariv back to back, or doing that Birkat Hamazon and being late for? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, well, firstly, it's not going to be an issue, because firstly, with Mincha, they do Ashrei first. So you're fine. You're fine. While they're doing Ashrei, you do Birkat Hamazon. You finish that. They don't start with the Amidah. They just don't.
I know that.
Okay, good. Well, good question. All right, let's
good answer. All right.
Marco, you had a great question. I know if it's coming from you, it's a good question. What is it, my friend? Talk to me.
No. I just wanted to clarify the Prosper story. And I was thinking of Hypothek, and I was thinking of the Prosper, and I was getting a bit confused. But just, if you can get the Prosper story, just explain that again. Sorry.
Okay. All right. So this is basically, you'll find it, you're catching me a bit off the fly here, but it's actually in Gittin 36a. Okay? It's in Gittin 36a. That's where the document explanation was given. On Bava Basra, Marco, 27a.
I remember now. No.
Okay, so I'm just telling you where it is. Okay. Let me just finish my sentence. Right. On Bava Basra 27a, you'll see that specifically with regards to the rule of the prosbul, it can't be completely overturned. So there's a couple of factors that have to apply. There has to be a concept saying that, listen, I can collect within the sixth year, and the only way I can say I can collect within the 6th year is to say, listen, you've given me land to pay back. So the land's not going anywhere. Whether I collect in the 6th year or a court appointed person collects for me in the 7th or collects for the court in the 7th, it doesn't matter. I can collect in the 6th. The land's not going anywhere. And that's why you can't do it on movable property, because it's not in your hand until it's in your hand. That's what it says in Bava Basra 65b and 66a. So that's why you need land. And the reason it was brought here is that you can't do, according to Rav Nachman, you can't do this acquisition of a prosper based on a slave, which is, for him, one of the reasons that slaves are considered as immovable and not land.
Mm. Yeah, that's where I was getting confused. I didn't know why we bought it in here. I forgot what the original thing was, but now I see why we bought it in here, the movable, immovable story, etc.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Okay, I hope I explained it well. I'm sorry, it took me a minute before the sources came to my mind.
It actually is part of the summary, I think, for today, I imagine.
Yeah, but it took me a second. You caught me off guard to know the summaries, but I gave you the accurate sources of everything.
Thank you.
Pleasure. All right. Not a perfect memory, but it's okay.
Yeah.
All right, guys. So
at least you have a memory, yeah.
we're discussing the third case. All right, so what was the third case? I'm just doing a summary, guys. So in the third brisa, it resolves the issues. Because I said in the first brisa, it seems to have a problem because if the buyer performed a proprietary act upon the land, he had acquired the slaves. That's in the second brisa, but the first brisa says he has not acquired the slaves. So we couldn't understand why the contradiction, right? So I'm just doing a quick summary of yesterday. So the contradiction is resolved when we say that the slaves have to actually be standing in the field. So that's understandable according to the resolution of Rav Ika, the son of Rav Ami, in which he states both Tanoim hold that slaves are treated as movable items in his mind. Because he was saying in one case the slaves are standing on the field, and in another case they're not. And so this, because what was it saying is if you acquired land, in one brisa it said you can acquire the slaves, and in another brisa it said you can't. Does that make sense? So it says, listen, if slaves are treated as movables, in the case where the land can't acquire the slaves, it's because the slaves weren't actually on the land at the time. Fine. If you want to say, according to his other opinion, that slaves are regarded as land, we learned before why land can't acquire. One of the requirements for land to acquire movables is what? Is that the land has to be fixed like the cities of Judah. Do you remember we learned that in Kedushin 26a? So slaves are movable. So they're movable land in that they're considered to be like land halachically, but according to that opinion that they like land halachically, they're still able to propel themselves. And therefore, a slave, if you consider a slave as in land halachically and not as a movable, it would physically have to be on the land that it acquires. Why? Because it's different when you're making an acquisition of fixed land on fixed land. Because Shmuel said that 10 fields in 10 different countries can be, that you can have a proprietary act upon one of the fields and gain none of the other fields. Does that make sense? You don't have to gain all of them from 10 different proprietary acts, but the reason is very clear. What's the reason? Is that the earth is one land mass, and you must know that the oceans are in the pockets where of water that inhabit 2/3 of the earth. The continents are all linked by the Earth's core with volcanic rock that's cooled. They're not floating continents. And since even if they're in different countries, it certainly doesn't matter because the Earth is one land mass. So they're still physically connected. A slave is immovable. And if he's movable and you consider him like halachically on land, like land can only acquire other land if A, it's fixed, or B, it's touching that other land. Does that make sense? So that's where we've solved that particular dilemma. Okay. Now, on the view, I just want to share something a second with you guys on the screen. Condition 26a. Hang on, guys. Share screen. Yeah. All right. So it says, and if you say that to acquire movable property by way of land, we require that property be actually piled upon it. For what is it? It's a beit selafet. It's impossible to pile 100 sheep and 100 barrels on top of such a small plot of land. So the Gemara rejects this argument. So what are we actually saying here? Is they're bringing a dispute to this that whether or not a slave is considered movable or like land, either way, there's a problem. What's the problem according to this? That if it's considered a movable, we learned in Kedushin 26a that you don't have to take everybody's livestock and throw it on the land at the time in order to acquire the land because it's not going to fit, maybe. We're not talking in a case, guys, of it being a huge field and a couple of farm animals. We're talking in the case maybe of you selling a portion of the land and it just won't practically fit. So in that case, one of the other arguments brought is that A slave differs from other movable property in two respects. One is he can propel himself, but Arthur and I had this discussion yesterday, that although a slave can propel itself and a tractor can't and a bakkie can't unless you start the car, can ox and sheep propel themselves?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the distinction Tosfot brings is that they're propelling themselves, but they have no consciousness in which field they're in. In other words, it can wander in terms of a different field and eat in the grain of another field, and he's not aware. The ox isn't aware of physical boundaries. A human being is aware, even though it's deemed the property of another, that what's considered his master's field and what's considered the next door neighbor's field. So it's the ability to propel mixed with human intelligence. And in that particular case, only those with human intelligence with the ability to propel would have to physically be on the land in order for the land to acquire that movable in that one brisa. The other brisa doesn't hold like that. They say they say that whether man is considered like land, man would have to be on the land because it's not like acquiring different sorts of land where they're connected by one earth land mass. Man is physically distinct from the land. So if you consider man halachically like land and not movable property, you would still have to acquire land with land, being that they're touching in some way, either by an earth mass or by physically touching. Does that make sense? So whether you treat a slave as a movable or you treat him as land halachically, either way, he would have to be on the land for acquisition. And this is nothing to do with a kinyan agav, to acquire movables with land. This is to do with acquiring specifically slaves that can propel themselves and have their own intelligence. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Okay.
David, can I just ask you a quick question? You don't have to answer it now. You can get back to us on this. It's quite interesting, this. What happens if a slave's got a family and the family's on 3 different lands and only one of the land pieces are sold? What happens in that particular case? It splits up the entire family. Presuming, based on the brisa where the slave is considered a movable part of the land, or he's considered land and he's acquired with that land, and his family is actually dwelling on a completely different plot.
Yeah, but Gav, in that particular case, I don't want to digress too much. In that particular case, it's either owned by the same owner himself, at which case for the sake of acquisition, they'd get the entire family on one plot of land, or those family members are all on different plots of the land owned by the one owner. So therefore, the lands connect themselves through the earthly land mass, and as long as the slaves are physically on his property, even if they're divorced, it's still all on his property.
Now, I'm presuming that they're not. They are different properties. But it's fine. We can get back to it.
You're missing what I'm saying. They're still owned by the same. In other words, it's in those days, when you owned a slave, you owned his children, his spouse, etc. That's why they got them to copulate, because you owned their descendants. So in that case, all the descendants would be on your property as the landowner as well. Even if they're different properties, you own all the properties.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
Okay. Well, that's presuming you're selling all the properties. Okay.
No, you're not having to sell the properties. We're talking about when you bought a property. We say, no, you are the buyer. You're not the seller. So when you're buying it, either your slaves are currently on your own properties, or when you're buying someone else's slaves, you get them all on the property you wish to purchase.
Yeah. I'm just presuming that he's not buying all the property. But it's fine, Damon. Move on. It's fine. I just raised a general question. I'm presuming they're on different properties.
I'm trying to say to you that if you want to acquire all the slaves, you would get them on that one piece of property.
Yes, if you want to acquire all the slaves. I'm saying if you want to acquire any one property and the slaves happen to be on different properties that you're not acquiring.
But then for the Kenyan Agav, you'd have to get them all on one property.
Okay, no, that makes sense. All right.
Yeah, 100% you'd have to get them on one property, the one that you purchased.
So you'd have to force them onto one property to make sure you get all of them.
Not force. But
acquire them.
Okay, so
good. Okay, right, so I'm happy with that answer. Thank you.
Okay, sure. So so guys, I'm sure you understand it. I'm just going to read it very, very quickly. This implies that the first brisa that teaches that he's not acquired the slave speaks of a case where the slaves were not standing in the field. Now, this is understandable according to that version of the resolution stated by Rav Ikka, the son of Rav Ami, in which he states that both Tanaim hold that slaves are treated as movable items. For this is an adequate reason for the law that if the slaves are standing in the field, then yes, they are acquired. But if not, they are not acquired. But according to the version of Rav Ikka's resolution, in which he stated that both Tanaim hold that slaves are regarded as land, why do I need the slaves to be standing in the field to be acquired? While Shmuel said if one sold another 10 fields in 10 different countries, once the buyer has performed a proprietary act upon one of the fields, he has acquired all of them. So we see this ruling that even widely separated lands can be acquired together. So the Gemara wants to know why a slave, if it's required, if he's seen as land and not movable, why it physically have to be on the land. I explained it before, guys. I'm just reading it straight out. The Gemara retorts that the other version of Rav Ikka's resolution is actually having to face the same reality. Because according to your reasoning, the distinction is difficult because if slaves are viewed as movables, why do I need slaves to be standing in the field to be acquired along with the field? 12b1. We have established that we do not require movables to be piled upon the land in order to be acquired together with the field. I showed you in Kedushin 26a. Rather, what there is for you to say an explanation of the requirement that slaves be standing in the field. So it says here, movable items that cannot propel themselves are different to movable items that can propel themselves. So if they're items like farm implements, etc., they don't have to be on that physical property in order that you acquire them with Kenyan Agav. But if they're movable items, they have to be on the property. And Tosfot wants to say this is not the case necessarily only because they're movable, because the distinction made by the Gemara is primarily between slaves that have intelligence and can go where they wish and can discern between properties, and movables that have no such intelligence. So accordingly, animals, although they can propel themselves, would need to be included in the second category, and they would not have to be present in the field. So fine, we've answered it in terms of movables, and we can say the same answer in terms of land, that the land that can propel itself is different than land that cannot propel itself. Accordingly, it could be understood that the earth is a mass. It's a single entity, and therefore a single proprietary act can suffice to acquire even widely separated fields. So thus the requirement that slaves must be standing on the field in order to be acquired, along with the field, can be understood according to either version of Rav Ikka's solution. Why? Because a physical human being is not a land mass, it's not connected, and therefore it would have to be touching the land and be physically connected. Guys, it's pretty straightforward. I hope I've explained all of this well. I'm also, while I'm reading it, throwing in commentaries in between so it makes more sense. Because Arthur will tell you, sometimes if you don't read it with the commentaries, it doesn't make as much sense. Arthur, do you agree?
100%, Dan. 100%.
Yes, most of us are doing prep without reading the commentaries.
You see,
that's why we sometimes make mistakes. So.
Okay, so I'll explain to you what I do. I use a Schottenstein. I read the top half first, which is everything, and then I go down to the bottom and I read the notes, and I sometimes refer back to the top, and often I find, oh, that's what they meant, because on the top half it's pretty cut and dry, and the bottom half actually gives you the actual meat, potato, gravy, and whatever with it on the explanation of what they were talking about. So it really helps.
No, agreed. I just don't have the time at the moment, but I will get there. That's my objective. Fine. I agree with you.
Look, the top half is better than nothing.
We're going into a different part now. Having a bit of a break from slaves, which I'm happy about. So the Mishnah states, we're on 12b1. One is liable for damages only to properties that are not subject to the law of Me'ilah. So the Gemara draws an inference. So what's the inference that it draws? That if it's only the law of Me'ilah that the Mishnah states must not apply to property in order for the damager to be liable. This implies, however, that if the property is not subject to Me'ilah, one is liable for its damage, even though it's consecrated property. So can I explain this in Damon language? I'm a bit deaf, so I have to explain it in an easy way so that anybody can understand. So, guys, what it's saying here is, initially it said in the Mishnah that if you damage properties that are subject to Me'ilah, you're not responsible for paying. But properties that are not subject to Me'ilah, you are responsible for paying. So that could be one of two things. Normal property that's owned by his fellow, your fellow Jew, you're responsible for paying. We know that. But why does it say the word Me'ilah? Because it should say the word hekdesh. So let me just explain to you the definition between them. Does everybody know what hekdesh is, guys?
Consecrated.
Okay.
In the temple, the consecrated items, no?
Yes. It's consecrated items, yes. So consecrated. Yeah, we're concentrated. Yeah.
And I've forgotten what Me'ilah is.
I'll tell you, guys. Okay, so listen, I don't know if you guys know this. I just want to give credence to Michael's definition, which is correct. A consecrated item is item that has been donated for holy use, for kodshim, for consecrated use, meaning you sacrificing it to Hashem, or it's a temple-based vessel. It's used for divine service. It's consecrated for holy purposes. So Me'ilah, Michael, is actually a tractate of Seder Kedoshim in the Mishnah. Okay, there's a whole Gemara in it. And it's both, you've got the Babylonian Talmud and you've got the Yerushalmi Talmud. And it deals with the exact provisions of law. And the law comes from Leviticus chapter 5, verse 15 to 16, concerning the trespass offering and the reparation which must be made by one who uses and enjoys a consecrated thing. So Me'ilah is when you're using a consecrated item for personal gain.
Okay.
Does that make sense? In other words,
personal gain for yourself or gain for the temple?
No. Obviously, it's for yourself because hekdesh means it's consecrated for divine service. So if you're using it for something mundane, that's Me'ilah. You're not allowed to. If you do it on purpose, you get the death penalty.
Yeah, okay? It sounds like it's illegal. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you get the death penalty. If you do it by accident, obviously you have to make an offering, etc. Yeah.
Okay. No, I remember.
Okay. So guys, let me just explain to you something quickly. So in the Mishnah, chapter 1 are sacrifices in which trespasses can occur. So that's for Kodesh Kodashim. In chapter 2 of that Mishnah, the time after which a trespass can take place in various meat offerings. So that in that particular case, we discussed it with a pigul. We discussed it before. If a Kohen eats it past its allotted time, and it's got a cutoff period of time. So there's a whole tractate in and of itself. Determination of a peruta, etc., etc. So let's not go into that whole detail, but I just wanted to explain to you that kodshim means consecrated items, and me'ilah means you abusing it for personal use. Can we remember that? That's all I'm saying. So what it's saying is here is it's saying that property that's not subject to me'ilah is liable for damage. But why didn't it say? Just hang on a sec, guys. Why didn't it say that property that is dedicated for holy service, for consecrated service, is not liable to damage. Do you remember we learned this, that Rabbi Akiva had a dissenting opinion, but the other rabbis said that if you hit an ox that was dedicated to be sacrificed in the temple, you didn't have to pay for it if your ox hit his ox. And Rabbi Akiva was saying the opposite. He was saying that if a temple ox hits an ox of another fellow, the temple is exempt. But all the rabbis agree that when it looks at the laws of kering, of goring, when your ox hits the ox of your fellow, it means your fellow's ox. The minute it's consecrated to the temple, it's no longer the ox of his fellow. So therefore, you're not liable to pay for it. Do you remember we learned that? But this Mishnah is talking about something different. It seemed to imply that if it's not subject to Me'ilah, meaning that it's consecrated, you are liable for damage. Because it should have said that property that is consecrated, you're not responsible for paying. Here it says only almost consecrated property that is being abused by using it for personal gain, you're not liable to pay. But consecrated property, you are. So this seems to be quite confusing upon first reading. Were any of you initially confused?
No, so I think I worked it out. I think if it's consecrated and you actually sacrifice it, once it's been sacrificed and it's gone through the temple, it's been used for temple purposes, then you're liable. But if
so it's a bit more, you're on the right track, but it's a bit more complicated. All right, guys, just give me a little bit of a chance to unroll it. But Gavin, you're on the right track. Just give me a bit of a chance, bud. So you are there, but we've got to make a distinction. Okay, let me just explain to you what the distinction is. There are sacrificial offerings fall into two categories. Kodshe Kodashim, and that's the most holy offerings. That's a Chatas offering, an Olah offering, an Asham offering. And then you've got lesser holiness offerings. And that's Kodashim Kalim, or Kalim. It's actually Kalim. I don't think it's the word Kalim. When I looked at it, because Kalim are vessels. It can contain vessels, but as far as Kalim are lesser offerings. Does that make sense? So you have the Shalamim, Bechor, and Maisa offerings. So again, there are two categories. Kodshe Kodashim, the most holy offerings. That's Chatas, Olah, and Asham offerings. And lesser holiness offerings, which is Kodashim Kalim. And that's Shalamim, Bechor, and Maisa offerings. So Gavin, they've got two different types of rules. So this is the rule. So the laws of Me'ilah for the two categories differ. So Kodshe Kodashim, which is the most holy, are subject to Me'ilah as soon as they consecrate it. Okay? Meaning if I turn around and say, I'm dedicating this ox to the temple, at that point, you cannot use them for any personal gain whatsoever. Does that make sense? But Kodashim Kalim, by contrast, are not subject to Me'ilah until after they have been slaughtered and their blood has been thrown onto the altar. Okay, so I need you to distinguish between the two, because the minute you can make this distinction, you can understand that there isn't a contradiction. Okay, so even then, only those, so if we're talking about the lower offerings of less holiness, the Kodashim Kalim, even then, those parts that are destined to be sacrificed actually become subject to Me'ilah, but not all of those parts. In other words, you've got the offerings of less holiness. There's a part of it where the blood and part of that animal gets sacrificed, but there's part of it that goes in the Kodashim Kalim by the Kohanim and the owner of the animal, and they're never subject to Me'ilah because they're allowed to use it.